And talking about my favorite topic, which is culture. So I think this is probably one of the biggest themes that definitely I've learned through being with One Fine Stay, is if you get the culture right and you get the team right, then everything else follows. Like you generally end up getting a good business model, you end up making sure that you carry on, you end up making sure that you get a product which people love. And One Fine Stay there we go, it's in. It's a really interesting topic in business because we're a very high-end business, which I'll talk about in a second. So we're first of all talking about kind of what is culture, assume till the audience, we talked a bit about this before, and then how to get it right and what it means, and then more importantly, how to not get it wrong, which is usually a way, way bigger issue and a lot easier to do. Then using it to your advantage. You'll notice in like in the programs, it's like into the industry disruption whirlwind or something. That's kind of referring to the last bit. It's not quite on that. So yeah, a bit about me. Whoa. Woo! That was a nice little dramatic forward. So yeah, a bit about me, One Fine Stay, as mentioned, high-end hospitality in people's homes. A lot of people mention it's kind of like a high-end Airbnb. So basically what we did, it was in hindsight, a ridiculously tough business to build because what we had is if we would meet a guest on arrival, if a boiler breaks, we would fix it. We would guarantee an incredibly high level of service. And what that meant is that we had to, because we had high-end people staying, so we had, and if people love you, it means that you can carry on getting great customers. So for instance, we would have Beck came and stayed with us, and then he told his friends, the Kings of Leon, and then they told Beyonce, and then she told, actually no, it's a slightly different thread, but Jamie Cullum stayed, and it's like we had a great service, and culture was part of what we needed to do in order to get it right, in order to make sure that, because it's such a high-end quality, you've got to make sure everything is spot on. What is culture? Is it this? Is it motivational posters? Is it ping pong tables? Is it all of the stuff would you kind of associate and you talk to a HR company about? No, it's not really. Everyone knows it's not. And often this sort of thing is a bad signifier that you're kind of pasting up. You're pasting up the wounds of your business to a place which, you're pasting up the wounds of the business to a place where you're not getting the fundamentals right. So when you're 4 or 5 people, how do you make sure you get that kind of energy? How do you make sure that people are as engaged and when you're that size as when you're 150 people or more, 150, 500, whatever. And I think, oh, fuck's sake, the main way to do it is do this. So this is my definition of culture. It's the collective way that people make, or the collective way people make individual decisions. And I think that this is the key. It's about not only, so I think about it like a flock of birds. So a flock of birds, when you see them, a company should be like that, right? They're moving together in complete synchrony. They know as an organization how to move, how to respond to threats, how to change direction with incredible speed. If they see a tree to land on and a great opportunity, they'll all swoop down and get it. And it's a real difficulty, especially like this is probably one of the biggest difficult learnings that we went through as a business. Is how do you let go as founders? Because often what you'll have is you've got this baby, you've got this thing which you love and you adore, and you've made all the decisions from day one. You're hiring these people who you kind of trust, but how do you get it to a point where you can let go of that trust, and so it can enable it to scale, and other people can start making those decisions? And this is the way to do it. And I think about it as a kind of a 3-part thing, which is who makes decisions in your business, what data do they use to make, what data do they use to make those decisions, and how do they use that data to make those decisions? So I've got this basic framework for thinking about like what types of businesses there are out there, and it's really important for you guys to think today what type of business you are and where do you fit within this structure. I think it's relatively self-explanatory. It's not, it's funny, it's obviously, as management consultants will tell you, a 2x2 can explain practically anything. And it's because like 2 dimensions is about the most you can fit on a slide. So going around the loop, you can kind of see and get a feel for how people make decisions in each of these businesses, right? So in a product-driven culture, making customers want what you want to build, it's like really, really experience-focused. It's about the customer journey. It's about how they feel about the product. But fundamentally, you're creating a marketplace, so you don't really have much data. And this is like a classic Apple scenario, right, where you've got Jobs at the top, who's making decisions, Jobs and Ive at the top, who are making decisions, and they're cascading them down to the business. And a lot of businesses end up in a product area where they really, really shouldn't be. And I think a large part of that is kind of like the CEO ego, and it's kind of, it feels better to be a product business. Second, you've got customer-driven businesses, which are kind of similar. It's like still very experience-focused, so you've got to make sure that that you're looking at the customer and you're doing everything, all your metrics. I think, as saying around Shazam, as long as you make the product good and your customers love it, then the revenue comes second. You'll be able to find a way. If you get eyeballs there, you'll be able to find a way how to make money, which is a big difference between the top two. So that's a customer-driven business, and key point there is you'll often see you've got to be focused way more on getting out there and talking to your customers. So you've got to be out there, you've got to be doing A/B tests, that sort of thing. Then you've got sales-driven culture, the classic Microsofts, where they'll be thinking same thing, where decisions are made lower down in the organization. So similar to a customer-driven, you can get that down with product managers, that sort of thing. And, but they'll be focusing on the revenue. They'll be focusing on checkboxes. So you look at like any Microsoft sales material, it's all about the number of different features that they've got up there. It's not about, well, it's the complete opposite to an Apple product, which is all about the experience, it's how it makes you feel, it's that cleanness and simplicity. And then finally, you've got an engineering culture, which is a Google thing, which is exactly like when you, again, like how do they make decisions and how do they come up with new ideas? They've got 20% time. The engineers are the people who are making those decisions and they're coming up with the new ideas and pushing new products. Because they don't have to worry about data, they don't have to worry about getting the right customers. As long as they can engineer something novel and new, then they'll end up being able to produce some sort of product out of it. Or not, but that's the main theory. So the other insidious thing that, the dirty little secret about building a great culture is normally it's, even if you get everything right, usually what happens is the good stuff helps you less than the bad stuff hurts you. So like the real hard thing is making sure that you don't fuck up, basically, compared to getting it right. So how do you do that? So in each of the different areas, I think about this in terms of confirmation biases, and this is kind of often how I think about people, and you'll see later kind of how these become completely ingrained. So you've got confirmation bias is a classic, and you'll all see this. So this is in a customer-driven environment, right? You're doing a lot of A/B tests. So how often do people do this, right? They'll do an A/B test, and this is like a pop-up. And you might have a hypothesis, which is, hey, I have a hypothesis that if we increase the length of time until we show the pop-up, we're going to reduce bounce rate. Great, that kind of makes sense. And then you go and test it, and guess what? Yeah, no-brainer, it reduces it. But that's confirmation bias. What you should do, and this is something that people do all the time, you should really avoid, is you should flip it on its head and then test the anti-hypothesis. So if you reduce the amount of time, does it also increase bounce rate, or does it increase bounce rate? And so this is a classic example where people, like even in customer-driven environments, they will constantly just reaffirm what they already know. Authority bias is a really good example of product-driven cultures, and you should probably start doing this today if, like, no matter what size of the business you are. This is a great situation where authority bias is where people really give too much credit to an individual. So you've got like the CEO, for instance, who wants a particular feature, but we all know that that person isn't necessarily the best at what they're doing. It might be that the UX individual as well may have a vastly overweighted sway when everybody in the business can have fantastic contribution. So this is a great game we can play. It's called Crazy Eights, where you get everyone within the business or everyone on a certain product to then write out 8 different product ideas and 8 different ways of solving a particular problem. Then you vote on it anonymously, and voila, you have a great system of finding out really good ideas which everyone genuinely believes in without making the falling into the trap of listening to the person who has the most power within the business. And you can do this with a lot of different areas. You've got bandwagon bias. We've all heard this before from the sales team. It's like, oh, we've got to have this feature because these guys have got this feature. But in reality, again, you should always A/B test into it because a lot of the time, again, pop-ups, they don't always work and it doesn't necessarily work for your business, so you've got to make sure you're testing into it. And there's overconfidence bias. We've seen this a lot in engineering cultures where engineers, I mean, it's no wonder that you've got a massive plethora of JavaScript, like for those who are engineers, a massive plethora of JavaScript frameworks out there because constantly it's like, hey, yeah, I can do a better job of that. And you're always reinventing the wheel, whereas in a business, what you've got to be doing is making sure that you're focusing on the stuff that really, really matters and assuming that you're going to do a fairly bad job at most things. So make sure you're picking the really few things which really matter in your business and focusing on those instead. And then the final one is a really is probably the worst bias there is, and it affects all different types of cultures. And that's called commitment bias and some cost fallacy. And I think everyone who plays poker will know what this bias is and kind of have a feeling of kind of they know what it's like. And this one affects big businesses a lot. And this is the reason why I bring this up is it's a really good opportunity for those here who are looking at, say, going into a business. So I think there was a question over there around how would you disrupt the music business? This is a nice framework for thinking about how you would think about going about exploiting their strengths for their, and using them as if they were weaknesses, or perceived strengths as weaknesses. So a good example, and this is a classic example which is out there, it's the Blockbuster Netflix story, and everyone's heard this story, and it's a very good story to start with because it's a rare situation where a company which is such a monopoly can end up being destroyed by another very small startup in complete entirety and have the industry truly transformed. Most of my other examples which will crop up are a little more balanced in terms of when industry disruption typically happens, you normally end up just taking a large amount of market share rather than completely destroying the incumbents. So what happened here? So Blockbuster, they started in 1985. They had huge dominance. So their key, and the reason why they were such a massive success, is they had around 8,000 stores globally and 60,000 staff. And they saw that as a fantastic asset, right? So those stores, they're a high fixed cost. So to get into a particular location cost you a lot of money. But it also meant that every video which was on those shelves cost them a lot of money when they weren't on those shelves, because that reduced choice, which meant if a customer walked into the store and they didn't find the video they wanted to get and they walked away, that was an enormous cost to their business. Whereas if you flip it on its head and Netflix came in, so their original model wasn't actually anything to do with like digital or online. It was slightly different. It started off with catalogs and sending out DVDs. But the key which they did there is completely changed how they thought about Blockbuster's fixed costs. So what they did is said, okay, we're going to change our cost base because there's no free lunch. But they thought on every DVD that we send out, what we'll do is we'll have a large warehouse outside of town to keep these DVDs in, which meant they could have huge volumes of DVDs, which meant two things. One, they had a massive catalog compared to an average Blockbuster store, which meant you could always get what you wanted. And secondly, they can also have massive numbers of duplicates. So if there's a rush on a particular film that people loved, they could have that space, which meant, again, you could have the products which you wanted. It did reduce some things like spontaneity. So you couldn't just wander down to the Blockbuster store, the Netflix store, and get what you wanted. But there's a trade-off there. And what they did allow is, and it's worked very well in Netflix's favor, is the fact that given postage was so high, if you bundled the DVDs together, then you could send them out all as one, and then you had that spontaneity within a certain area. And the crucial thing is that they didn't then have their revenue base, which was the recurring revenue, not the recurring revenue, the late fees. So most people, when they rented like a movie, right, or a DVD, they'll, like in the old days, you watch it on a Friday and you don't really want to think about it till the next Friday when you want to go get another DVD. But in reality, what Blockbuster wants to do is get that DVD back into the shop long before anyone else comes along. So after a couple of days, they're going to start putting penalty charges on you. which is the real tipping point with Netflix, is because you could just hold on to those DVDs for as long as you liked. And that worked in flavor for Netflix, because effectively you're just holding their stock for them wherever. So that's the key difference between Blockbuster and Netflix here, is that they used an asset which Blockbuster had, and they had the opportunity to buy Netflix back in 2000 for £50 million, which is a pretty ridiculous number when you look at it today. But they decided not to, because they thought, right, we've got all of these stores which we're paying so much money on, and we have so much invested in all of these stores and the staff that we've trained. There's no way we can flip to doing this mail order delivery business, because it will completely cannibalize that business in the short term. And so that's the theme here, is using an asset which somebody's invested a huge amount of money in, and they've gone, I really, really love and want this, and then using it against them. So another good example is hotels and Airbnb, and this is where One Fine Stay kind of sits in the middle. So hotels, what do they have? They have huge, great big fixed costs, which they've sunk enormous amounts of money into, right? They've spent like millions and millions, especially in London. Like an average hotel might cost 30 million, something like that. Like, are they, if demand changes, or if the style and authenticity or culture changes, are they going to want to shift? No, hell no. That's just not in their incentive, because again, they've got this fixed cost, they've got this commitment bias that they have to stand by their hotels. And it's a worse thing, because often those hotels are owned by franchisees. They aren't even their assets. They have to stand by their franchisees. Whereas Airbnb comes in with a completely different cultural, well, actually picking up on a different cultural wind. Because I think that's the key trend here, and it's often the key trend with a lot of these situations, is that you've got something that changes within how customers want to consume the product. So within the hotel industry, that was the real change that's happened today, is that historically hotels have been fantastic. So I think it's Hilton's tagline was, when you stay in a Hilton, you're staying in a same Hilton across, you could be staying in a Hilton anywhere in the world. Which, like, that kind of makes a lot of people here cringe. But 30 years ago, that was fantastic, because it meant you had clean water, it meant you had ice, it meant that you had like security and safety no matter where you traveled in the world. But now, as the world's become secure and safe, it doesn't make any sense anymore. People want an authentic experience. And so staying in somebody's home is actually a great experience. Like, everyone kind of has Wi-Fi now. Everyone vaguely knows how to make sure that their house is clean. Everyone's got decent water. Everyone's got decent soilage and all the rest of it. And so that's the real shift here. But hotels couldn't move into doing an in-home rental business, which they could do, because I mean, fundamentally, what is their USP? Their USP is service. But they think about it as their fixed cost and their assets. That's why these guys ended up wiping the floor with the market and causing real industry disruption. And it's where we've ended up, so I mean, I can maybe answer some questions about it later, but it's why we ended up getting bought by one particular hotel chain who have their asset base in a completely different way. And we've helped them transition. Stella and Brewdog. I don't know if Brewdog's here, but they kind of, there's lots of other ways of thinking about this. Like, what is somebody's asset, right? It's not always a physical asset. It can be, in sometimes, a brand asset. So Stella's case is kind of like, what is their USP? It's not really the recipe. It's not a particularly advanced recipe. It's like, particularly with alcohol, it's pretty much all about the branding. And that's what Brewdog came in with, is they were like, hey, we're not the big guys. We are, like, explicitly, they've taken the action of going, right, we're going to use your strength, which is the fact that we're established, people know what Stella tastes like, I know what I'm getting with Stella, and they flip that on its head and being like, no, fuck you guys, we're rebels, we're punks, we're not going to raise from the typical capitalists, we're not going to become like a massive business, we're going to do things completely differently. And this is a similar theme which has been played out time and time again with companies like Virgin. They're like a classic. They'll go into a market and they'll use the fact that they are the new guys. So I think a big lesson here is that you don't have to pretend like you're a big guy. Use the fact that you're a new guy to your advantage, particularly in customer-driven markets, so when a market is really mature and developed. Another really good example of someone who smashed it in terms of industry disruption. So what did Hillary have? She had Clinton, that was her brand. She represented the establishment. She represented, for better or for worse, she represented the kind of the corrupt nature, and that's why they kept on playing on things like the email issues and a lot of her cronyism, because that's what she had as her asset. But what Trump did is he knew that, and he was like, I'm not part of the establishment. I've not been in office. I'm a completely fresh and new face. And that's why he ended up winning. He used her brand asset against it again. But the thing is, what she should have done, like, people knew this headway, and she should have distanced herself from Bill. She should have distanced herself from the establishment, or actually the Democrats should have got in Bernie Sanders. And then again, an engineering example, why did the steam trains not invent the car? Why did Kodak not invent the digital camera? It's because the steam trains, they had the railways. They owned the monopoly on the railways, so of course they wanted to perpetuate their monopoly in terms of trains. And in Kodak's case, they wanted to perpetuate people buying film, because again, they had this monopoly on film, and that was their asset. And so again, going back to the culture thing, is that you can use that disruption in any different type of your business. So first of all, work out what type of business you are building, and then look at how can you use that against them. So yeah, so they're the learnings. So today, kind of like think about the culture, and it's an important one, because it might seem a bit abstract and vague today, but it's one of those things where you don't know if you've got it right for a couple of years. And then in a couple of years' time, what will happen is you'll go, shit, we got this really wrong. And our business is now big, and now we've got to go change the culture, which is an incredibly hard thing to do. So that's why, yeah, I hope this was useful today. Thanks very much.